First Lady Michelle Obama giving rousing remarks to this crowd here, very well received as she spoke of her and the president's humble beginnings, talking about how when they first started dating, he picked her up in a rusted out car. His proudest possession was his coffee table, retrieved from a dumpster, and talking about how their families never begrudged anyone else's success. The theme of the speech was opportunity, about how the president wants everyone in the country to have the same opportunity, talking about how if you've walked through the doorway of opportunity, you do not slam it behind you. And it was a similar theme we heard from the keynote speaker, Mayor Julian Castro, who talked about the importance of ensuring opportunity in this country and saying the Republicans are focused on individual success, but the question really is, how do we multiply that success, Brett?
Her brother, Craig, in the suite there. We're told the president and the girls, as well as Mrs. Robinson, watched from the White House tonight, cheering the First Lady on. It was a speech that was highly personal, laced with, as you mentioned, those humble beginning stories. She did say a number of times that change is hard, a message that will try to attract some of the challenges that this president has facing this economy. I will say one line, I could almost see the Republicans raising eyebrows up in Washington, and that was this line. For Barack, there is no such thing as us and them. He doesn't care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or none of the above. I think that the Republican reaction to that might be different than what we saw in this hall, judging by what happened up in Capitol Hill over the past couple of years.
And speaking of keynote speakers, it reminds you of his keynote address in 2004, which catapulted him into national fame when Barack Obama spoke at that convention. It was a message he brought to the public back in 2008, but it is one that people have questioned since he became president.
Chris Wallace is standing by at the podium position near the convention floor. Chris.
You know, Brett, it's interesting. When this evening began, the Obama campaign said that Michelle Obama is, according to the polls, the most popular political figure in this country, and you could certainly understand why. It's interesting. We got the text well before she delivered it, and I thought it was an okay speech, but as you heard her delivery, it was just masterful, and she was reading from a teleprompter, but you couldn't tell. It seemed to come totally from her heart and very much seemed to affect the crowd. The Obama campaign said that she would act as a character witness for her husband, and a very powerful witness she was, as she talked about his values and his struggles, the way he made decisions and the policies that he had taken. And at one point she said, and it got a big applause from the crowd, being president doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. He knows the American dream because he's lived it. I've got to say, listening closely to the speech, one of the things that struck me was it was all about government. When she talked at the beginning about the people who exemplify the best of the American spirit, she talked about teachers and first responders and the military, all very admirable professions, but all government. When she talked about ways to build the middle class, it was all about the auto bailout and student loans and health care reform. Once again, all government programs, and that was a subtle subtext to the entire speech. The other thing that I noticed, and you talked about the line about that we're all one America, and certainly that hasn't been the way this president has run the campaign, which has been quite sharp, quite partisan, quite negative. The other thing I noticed is at one point she said our families didn't begrudge anyone else's success. They admired it, which seemed to a certain degree as if she was trying to fire back at what the Republicans had been saying about the Democrats and class warfare at their convention. But on the other hand, later in the speech, she said, success isn't about how much money you make. It's about the difference you make in people's lives. Finally, having been in Tampa last week and been here this week, just the change, the difference in tone, the difference of philosophy, you could hear it in the Castro speech, you could hear it in Michelle Obama's speech, the reliance on government, the praise on government, the central role it plays in their vision of America, very different from what we heard from the Republicans last week in Tampa. Brett, back to you.
Chris Wallace down on the podium. Chris, thank you.
Was it just me, or did he look like a lawyer in the courtroom standing next to the stenographer making his final argument?
Final argument.
Brings me back. Martha McCallum is live on the floor in the midst of it all. Martha, your take?
Megan, very positive response here from the floor, very enthusiastic from all of the people who were listening to this. We heard a lot of the things that have surfaced during the entire war on women argument. One of the things that they made a big point about was Barack Obama's grandmother, how she took the bus to her job at the bank, and that, you know, she was passed over for promotions by men who had done, you know, who were not people that had succeeded or should have succeeded before her. So a lot of points along those lines, that you need to get a fair shake, and definitely the suggestion that government is what has to provide that fair shake for people in America, and that Michelle Obama is arguing that her husband is the person who can do that. When I think back to the Republican convention and we think about Ann Romney's speech, it really was about personal strength, embracing success, individual merit, the importance of individual merit in the United States. So that really is the line that has been drawn here in terms of how each side sees America getting back on its feet. Very different vision for the country, very well laid out by both of these women, one the First Lady and one who would like to be. Back to you.
Martha McCallum, thank you.
Let's head back to the panel. Karl Rove, Kirsten Powers, and Britt Hume. Britt, your thoughts?
Well, my first thought was when I see her there is that this is an extremely impressive and attractive woman. And I think that I agree with Chris entirely that she, in delivering it, was better than the speech. The one thing I have to note is that there's one thing that seems to be happening, and you saw some of this at the Republican convention as well. They get into kind of a destitution derby in which every speaker seems to be trying to best the previous one in the limited things they had growing up. I mean, I knew that Barack Obama did not grow up rich, but I never knew until tonight that he went dumpster diving for furniture, and that he drove a rusted out car, and that his shoes didn't fit. I mean, that was new to me, and I guess I admire him all the more because. But
Ann and Mitt Romney ate the dinner on the ironing board.
At the desk on the sawdust bottom.
There was plenty of this from both conventions. The other thing I would say about it is that one thing that Michelle Obama did, I think, effectively was she vouched for her husband as a loving husband and as a man of character, and she spoke with obvious feeling and conviction about that, and it was impressive when you heard her say it. You didn't get any sense from this speech tonight at all of where he wants to take the country next. That was utterly absent. Now, that may not have been part of the assigned role. There'll be plenty of time for him to do that and for others as well, but you certainly did not do that. You did have, as Chris pointed out, I think quite effectively, a whole series of things that we talked about, and it is true that every single one of them did relate to government. There was no mention that I can recall in this speech of any moment at all about the private sector, which drives and finances all this government that we hear so much about.
And Kirsten, your thoughts on that piece of it, the numerous mentions of government, and as related to what Mayor Castro talked about, because he had a line in his speech where he said, if we sever the threads that connect us, only those who are already ahead succeed. And he seemed to be talking about government.
Right. Well, that was clearly the theme that united both of these speeches, and that is the contrast between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And one of the key reasons that they continue to do this is that the women that they're trying to reach, unmarried women, are people who see the government as their safety net. They really feel vulnerable, and so they want to know that the government is going to be there for them. And so I think that it's not an accident that this is woven through everything. I think that Michelle was absolutely brilliant. She was warm, and you can see it's this sort of yin and yang with Michelle and Barack Obama, that she is the warmth. She makes him more likable because he's a cool customer. And I think she really just brought this personal element to it. She appealed to women through the mom-in-chief. She brought up Lilly Ledbetter, the glass ceiling. There were a lot of things there that I think really appealed to women.
She also mentioned the reproductive rights issue.
Absolutely, yeah.
This point about government matters a lot because I thought it was particularly apparent in Mayor Castro's keynote, which I think, frankly, was an average speech. But there's a tension between the personal narrative and the political narrative. In the personal narrative, his grandmother's sacrifice as being a cook, a maid, and a babysitter in order to give he and his brother give his mother a chance to move ahead and to give a chance for them to move ahead is at odds with the political narrative, in which he said, roads and bridges, universities and schools predate jobs and opportunity. And then he got to the most extraordinary line of the night. How do we multiply individual success? The answer is President Barack Obama, which is, the deification, the personification of our success as individuals is in the president. Strikes me as a little weird.
So is this the beginning of the response to "you didn't build that" from the Republican?
Yeah, it is. The president is responsible for it, and it's the roads and the bridges, the universities and the schools predate jobs and success, individual success. And I'm not certain that sinks in with the average people. I thought the speech by the First Lady was very well delivered, but I thought the parts of it that were devoted to her personal story, his upbringing, her upbringing, that was very good. When she ventured into the political sphere, it wasn't as good. About a quarter of the way through, half the way through, she had 9 sentences, which was a laundry list of achievements. Well received here in the hall, but I'm not certain well received necessarily out in the country. It was sort of jarring, and she repeated it again about 3/4 of the way through. She had 10 sentences devoted to Barack Obama, the politician, and you hit on the best one of the night. He doesn't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican. He knows we all love our country, and he's always ready to listen to good ideas. Tell that to Paul Ryan, who was invited by the president to sit in the front row at George Washington University so he could call his budget proposal un-American. I mean, I'm not exactly certain that that's how the president exactly does. She was a better witness for him as an individual, not as good a witness for him as a political actor.
And quickly, because we're going to wrap up and hit Charles Krauthammer on the other side of the break, final thoughts from you two in 10 seconds.
Oh, I think this convention's off to a pretty good start tonight. I thought Mayor Castro made a good speech. It seemed, I must say I am growing a little weary of everybody talking about what humble beginnings they had, and it was interesting to know that he said early in the speech that they were remarkable, but then he later said there was nothing special about his upbringing. Well, people may be getting a little bit tired of that, but Michelle Obama was a big hit in the hall. I'm sure people around the country looked at her and thought how impressive she was.
Yeah, I think Mayor Castro, actually, I think a star was born. I think he did a great speech. You can't compare it favorably necessarily to Obama's speech, which was a much more soaring speech when he gave it. But technically, it was very, very astute. It hit the points, and there was a lot about American exceptionalism in there all throughout the speech, where I think he really balanced out the idea that this is a great country because we don't leave each other out there by ourselves. We do support each other, and that's a really critical part to people's success.
What was interesting is that they've spent so much money, the Democrats, in trying to paint Mitt Romney as this vulture, this corporate raider, this man who may be responsible for some woman's death from cancer. And then the keynote speaker got up there tonight and called him a good guy. One good guy who's coming up right after this break is Charles Krauthammer. And as our coverage continues live, we hope you'll stay with us here at the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte.